Ireland's economy grew nearly 8% last year, but there are headwinds this year. Joining me now is Marian Harkin, EU Parliament member representing Ireland, who serves on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. It is so nice to see you here in the States.
And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
And there's so much to talk about. I want to dive right into it. One item we've been reporting on a lot and an issue of concern is this possible Brexit by the UK. If the UK leaves the European Union, what does that mean for Ireland economically, especially since so many of your exports go there?
Indeed, and if you look at our economic growth, 7.8% GDP increase last year, yet about 1 billion a year. That's the level of trade between Ireland and the UK. We export more to the UK than any other country. And indeed, I think one of the reasons for our growth is the fact that we export to the UK and to the US. As you know, the European market is quite sluggish at the moment. So if there were to be a Brexit, there would be a huge dislocation. But it's not just for Ireland. I mean, the UK, we're their fourth largest importer. You mightn't think that because we're a small country. So between the two of us, there's a huge level of trade. So any dislocation of that would have a significant impact. And again, you know, with trade, countries tend to export to countries that are closest to them. And if you think of the UK, a lot of their exports are high value goods. So they need to export to Ireland. They need to export to Europe. So despite the fact that many in the UK would say, oh, we can export to other markets, we can, you know, increase our exports. It's not as simple as that.
Well, it's certainly a complicated issue. And another side story going on in Europe is what's been happening with your economy and the ECB, which has taken aggressive action. In some ways, the markets have been confused at times.
Yes.
Other people are worried about what this negative rate story means and what else do you do if this doesn't work. Is the ECB's current round of action going to be effective in terms of spurring growth?
Well, that's the question everybody is asking. I mean, we started off with zero interest rates. We had quantitative easing. We have more asset purchases now, and we're into negative interest rates. And people are still saying, is that enough? I suppose at one level, Draghi has always said he will do what is necessary. But at another level, you know, his hands are tied. It's my understanding that the German and Dutch representatives on the ECB voted against Draghi's, you know, his recent efforts. So that shows you the tensions that are there at this point in time. I mean, he is promising to give more money to banks, provided they lend it out to the real economy. I was reading something really interesting the other day. They described the ECB as the Starship Enterprise, and they described the European banks as the Klingons, those who are clinging on to money, that they won't let it out into the real economy. So I think that's what Draghi is trying to do. But he has only so many tools in his arsenal, and people are beginning to wonder, is this enough? I think member states are not taking on their responsibility, especially those that have room to manoeuvre. A country like Ireland, you know, we're still in pretty much of a straitjacket. You know, you look at Portugal, Spain, Italy, but there are other countries who have room to manoeuvre, to spend more money, to loosen up their policy, and it's not happening at the rate at which it needs to.
It's a great point. Ireland has actually made quite a comeback from just a couple of years ago when people were very concerned about the economy. And one benefit that Ireland has experienced is what happens with your corporate tax rate. And we've seen U.S. companies take advantage of that. And there's been criticism as well of tax inversions and stuff. I know several U.S. companies are in Ireland and they're discussing tax issues. What, if anything, will change on that front in terms of the relationship between Ireland's corporate tax structure and international companies that look to do business there?
Well, I think there's a lot of things happening at the moment. We obviously have the work of the OECD with their BEPS, Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Initiative, and we're all cooperating with that. But equally, the European Commission is taking quite an aggressive stance at this stage. You know, it depends on which side you're on. There are those who say they're targeting American companies. On the other hand, I think Vestager, who's the commissioner in charge, is a reasonable woman. And while we were told that the investigation into Apple in Ireland, we expected word before Christmas, and now she's told us recently, don't hold your breath. So this is taking a long time. And it's a difficult one for Ireland because obviously I mentioned our growth a few minutes ago, the 7.8% GDP. A certain amount of that, a significant amount of it, is due to the operations of multinationals. So I think what multinationals do is they exploit the mismatch between different tax systems in different countries. That's what they do. I think at European level, we do need to ensure that multinationals pay a fair share of tax. But equally, what we have to be very careful about is we don't price ourselves out of the market. My view is the OECD does a lot of good work in this area. Yes, it needs a push. Yes, we need to move more in that direction, because citizens, I suspect here, as much as in Europe, are very concerned that multinationals pay their share of tax, because they know that if they don't, it's the ordinary citizen has to pay it. But we've got to find a way of moving forward that doesn't disadvantage Ireland, that's what I'm interested in, and Europe also, but equally that it doesn't set out to target any group of multinationals in particular.
Very quickly, we've touched on a lot of issues. Politics, we haven't. Ireland in the midst of trying to form a new government, and your Prime Minister recently had to step aside as a coalition hopefully will be sorted out. What's the biggest sticking point for this coalition government to be reached and to move forward?
Well, we're celebrating 100 years since the 1916 Rising, and after that we had a civil war in Ireland. And after that, really two major political parties grew, and we call them civil war parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and they have been the major parties in government basically for the last 80, 90 years, whatever. However, we are now in a position that the only way that we can find a stable government is for those two parties to come together. It doesn't look like happening at the moment. There's a lot of sabre rattling and shadow dancing and people saying what they will and they won't do. You know how this, and then 2 weeks later, arrangements are found that will work. So it's a difficult one. And with all of those figures, the good figures, you'd think maybe the current government, the previous government might be re-elected. But I was saying to you earlier that their slogan was, keep the recovery going. But that was the wrong slogan. Their slogan should have been, I think, bring the recovery home. Because a lot of people knew there was a recovery happening. They can read the figures like anybody else, but they weren't feeling it in their pockets, at least not to the extent they thought they would. And I think that was an element in creating the certain amount of instability we have now. But look, politicians know how to get together, and if they're interested in ensuring the long-term stability of the country, then they have their duty to do, because in my opinion, the Irish citizens would treat quite harshly any party that went back in the next 3-6 months that didn't make a genuine effort to try and form a stable government.
Marian Harkin, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I'm Rhonda Schaffler for The Street.